Yes. So we started monopolistic competition on Tuesday. Let's see. So let's do some reviews before we get to the new topic, okay? So do you remember anything about what monopolistic competition, like what type, how many farms there are, what type of product they're selling? What do you remember?
There are a lot of farms.
Good. Yes, there are a lot of farms. Are there as many as perfect competition?
In perfect competition, there's only one, right?
No. So perfect competition, remember, that was the very first one that we talked about. There were, infinitely many producers, like farms, and also consumers, right? But then monopoly was the one where there was only one farm, right?
Okay.
So here
monopolistic competition.
yeah, so monopolistic competition, right? It's sort of like a in between monopoly and perfect competition. So they have some characteristics of monopoly, but also some characteristics of perfect competition, which is why they're sort of the name has both of those things. Okay, so monopolistic competition, there are large number of relatively small farms. Okay, so that's one thing. And then so then what? So they, because there are so many farms, right? Large number of small farms. Each of those farms have a relatively small share of the market. Does that make sense to you? So because they're not too big, so it's not like each one of those farms is very small compared to the entire market.
Okay? Like they have something different.
So no, the product, that's different, but then say, like, in terms of how many products they sell compared to, like, so the farm and the market, right, they're different.
Yeah.
So the farm, maybe they're selling, each individual farm may only be selling 2% of the product that is being sold in the entire market. So if there are 10,000, I don't know, clothing that are sold in the entire market in a month, maybe each farm only sells like 300 or something in a month. Okay, so the volume, the sales volume, or the output they produce is very small compared to the entire market. So that's what we mean. And then what do you remember the type of product they're selling? Are they identical, or are there substitutes available? What do the product look like?
They're selling what do you mean, like?
So remember, with perfect competition, so what are, okay, if that is not
The
helpful,
products
think
are
about,
common.
sorry.
Common.
So think about perfect competition. We said that the product they're selling is exactly identical, right? So wheat is the same, right? If they're selling wheat, it's very hard to distinguish one wheat from another. If it's vegetables, there are fruits, it's most likely that there is not a whole lot of difference in those products. And then with monopoly, we said that there was only one seller who is selling something that is unique and nobody else has. There is no substitutes for it. With monopolistic competition, now they sell a product that is somewhat different than their competitor. So each farm is selling a product that is a little bit different than their competitor, but it's not like there is no substitute available for their product. Okay, so there are close substitutes available. And then we talked about barriers to entry in this market. There are it this in this way it is very close to perfect
Easy.
competition. No barrier to entry or exit.
Easy to enter.
Easy to enter and exit. Okay. And then, do you remember anything about what the demand curve looks like for monopolistic competition?
So the demand.
Is it like this or like this?
Wait, what? I didn't saw.
Here.
Yeah, I see. It's downward.
Yes. So remember, this is only the case, perfectly elastic horizontal demand curve. This is only with perfect competition. With monopoly,
but less elastic than perfect competition.
yes. Well, yes. So it is less elastic. So perfect competition is perfectly elastic, right? With monopoly and monopolistic competition, they are downward sloping, right? And monopoly, the graph is gonna be more flat. I'm sorry, more steep, more inelastic.
More inelastic.
Yeah, so that's monopoly, okay? But monopolistic competition, I'm gonna rewrite this as this, okay? It's gonna be more flatter, okay? It's not like perfect competition, which is perfectly flat, but it's gonna be more flatter or more elastic than monopoly, okay? And the reason is because the product that a monopoly sells, there is no other such thing available, right? But the monopolistic competition is selling something that has, some sort of substitute. So if the demand for your product is inelastic, it means that even if you raise price quite a bit, people are not really going to change the quantity demanded by very much, right? They're gonna more or less, buy same quantity as they were before. And that is because there is no substitute available for this product, right? But with monopolistic competition, right, because there are substitutes available, if one farm raises their price and increases the price for their product, you can just go easily to another farm, and you're not going to find that exact same product, but you can find something very similar. Okay, so this is why they have a demand curve. Each individual farm has a demand curve that is downward sloping and fairly elastic. Okay. And the other difference with monopoly and monopolistic competition is that for the monopoly, the farm, and the market are one and same, right? Because there is only one farm, right? So whatever product this one farm is selling, right, that is the market as well. That is how much is going to be sold and bought in the market, because there is only one farm. So the farm and market are one and same. So this demand curve, right, that the farm is facing is also the market demand curve. But this is not the case with monopolistic competition, because of course, there are a large number of small farms, and each individual farm faces a downward sloping demand curve, but it is not the market demand curve. The market demand curve is going to be, combining the demand curve for all the individual farms together. It's going to be something else. So we don't really need to talk about that. With Remember when we talked about perfect competition, we had side by side graphs. We were looking at market and farm. Remember this, Sandra? Okay. So we only do that with perfect competition. And once we finished with perfect competition, we didn't really have to do this side by side graph anymore, market and farm. We only looked at things at the farm level, starting with monopoly. So we don't really have to worry about, what the market demand or supply looks like. We just worry about, what the individual farm's demand curve looks like. And we know that it's
Okay.
downward sloping and relatively elastic. Then we talked about how the monopolistically competitive farms choose their profit maximizing quantity. Okay. Anytime we talk about profit maximization, okay, I want you to think about, this is what they're asking me. Like, how do they choose quantity? Okay. So they are deciding how much to produce. So profit maximization, if we talk about that, it has to do with Q. Okay, how much to produce, that will maximize my profit. And always, 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 with perfect competition, monopolistic competition, monopoly, we saw that the profit
MR
maximizing
equals this.
rule is where MR is equal to MC. This is
Yeah.
where you will choose your quantity. Where these two are equal to each other, this is your Q star. And then they find the P star from finding where this Q star meets the demand curve. Okay, let's take a look at that. So this is quantity price. We have our demand curve. We have our marginal revenue curve. And remember that your marginal revenue curve, should cross your horizontal axis halfway. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so if I extended my demand curve, if it met the quantity axis, it would get to somewhere like this. So your marginal revenue should be like somewhere halfway. So right now mine looks a little bit, to the left, but that's okay. You understand the point, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so don't do this. If you draw your demand curve or not like this, don't draw marginal revenue over here because it is not even close to halfway.
Okay.
So then I'm going to bring in the marginal cost curve, and at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost is where my profit maximizing quantity is for the monopolistic competition. So this is Q star. And then I'm going to find, the price I'm going to charge is going to be where this Q star meets the demand. Okay. So this is where it happens. This is P star. Okay. And if so monopolistically competitive farms can have profit or losses in the short run. So it's possible they can have either profit or losses in the short run. So if we were to demonstrate, what profit, how we visualize profit in the short run for a monopolistically competitive farm, we're just going to have to bring in the average total cost curve, which looks something like this. And hopefully you can understand by now that this is where that profit box would be, because
Yeah.
this is P star, this is Q star, and then the average total cost of producing this quantity Q star is over here. This is where it intersects the average total cost. So this is your profit box. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the next one, they can also have losses. So if we're talking about loss, we do, the same thing again. Demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost. So, this is Q star. This is P star. And then my average total cost curve is going to be located higher. So it's over here. So, oops. Okay. So do you see that, Sandra?
Yeah.
So this is my loss box because, my Q star and my P star is over here, right, for producing Q star. And then my average total cost of producing this Q star is
Right.
at this
Yeah.
level. So this is my
So this is
loss.
a break and a shutdown.
Sorry?
So this is a break. It's called break
Oh, so
even, right?
break even and shutdown, those things are related to average variable cost. Remember? So break even
Yeah.
is when price is equal to ATC, right? So that's your
And that they
break.
don't make any profit.
Yeah, so that's, we talked about this with perfect competition, but this idea is still relevant. We don't really talk about shutdown point when we talk about monopolistic competition, but it's a good point to remember. So this is, we talked about this with perfect competition. Whenever price is lower than average variable cost, you shut down.
Yeah.
Okay. So then now we're going to talk about adjustments. Okay. And the reason we have to talk about adjustments is because there are no barriers to entry or exit in monopolistically competitive markets, right? So even if they can make profits or losses in the short run, these profits or losses really don't last in the long run because other firms can come in when they see profit and take some of those profits away. And farms, when farms exit because they're making losses, okay, some of that loss gets reduced, and at the end, in the long run, they're gonna be left with zero economic profit, which is something that we saw with perfect competition as well. Okay. So
Yeah.
this is how this idea of long run adjustment, this is how, because there are no barriers to entry or exit in both perfect competition and monopolistic competition, um, this leads to zero economic profit in long run for both of them, for both perfect competition and monopolistic competition. But with monopoly, remember, because there are huge barriers to entry or exit, if they make short run profits, in the short run, and they all usually do, they make profits in the short run, they can actually keep those in the long run as well because they don't really have this fear that other people can come in and take away their profit. Okay. So the reason, the way this happens in monopolistically competitive industry is that when new farms enter the market, okay, imagine some new farm is coming in. So in the next slide we're going to talk about an example of a hot dog shack. Okay, so this is an example of monopolistic competition, where there are a relatively large number of sellers selling hot dogs. Hot dog is something that is could be different from one vendor to another, but at the end, you can, if you don't, if you can find close substitutes for it. So then what we see here in the next, what we'll see in the next slide is that this one farm, Bob, is making economic profit selling hot dogs in the short run. And then what then happens is that other people see this economic profit and they want some of this profit for themselves. So this other new vendor, Joseph, comes into the market, and then what exactly happens to Bob? Okay, so Bob is the one farm that we are talking about right now. Okay, so when Bob, when new farms enter the hot dog market, right, because Bob, the original seller, right, the vendor, was making economic profit selling hot dogs. So when Joseph comes in, the new vendor, he is, coming in with a differentiated product, right? So maybe, he is not only selling hot dogs, maybe he's offering something else on the side. Maybe he has better sauces available, better toppings or something. So whatever the reason, he is coming in with a differentiated product. And what that will do is some of Bob's customers will now go to Joseph. So Joseph is essentially going to be able to steal some customers away from Bob. And he is, the demand for Bob's hot dogs will go down, will decrease. And how we show that on the graph is we shift Bob's demand downward. So we'll shift his demand curve downward, and also the marginal revenue is related to demand. So we'll shift both of those curves downward. And this happens when new farms enter. Okay, demand goes down, demand curve will shift downward. And then when the opposite thing happens, when other farms will exit the market. So if farms are making losses in the short run, in the long run they're going to exit the market. And they'll be able to do that because there are no barriers to exit. And what then happens is that if the farms that are exiting, right, they had some customers they were servicing, and now those customers are going to go to the farms that have remained, right? And essentially what that does is it will increase demand for hot dogs for remaining farms. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So the farms that have stayed, right, the demand for their hot dogs will go up. And then the demand curve will shift up. The marginal revenue will shift up as well. So here the demand curve shifts down, marginal revenue shifts down, and here they will both shift up. And that this is all going to happen because there are no barriers to entry or exit. And the way we show that in monopolistic competition is by moving our demand curve and our marginal revenue curve. Okay, so this is the example that I was talking about here. Okay, so we have Bob's hot dog shack, and this is his demand, his marginal revenue curve. And these are Bob's competitors, right, that already existed in the market. So even with all this competition, Bob was actually making economic profit. And now Joseph sees that Bob is making economic profit and he wants to enter the market. So now let's do this visually, graphically, and take a look at what happens, what was happening before and what happens when Joseph enters the market. Oops. This is demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost. This is Q star, P star. Okay. So here we're saying that Bob is making economic profit, right? So let's see, this, we're going to say that this is what his average total cost curve looks like. So this is where the area of profit would be, but we're not going to show it here because I'm going to show you the shift. So as you can see here, this is a demonstration of Bob making economic profit. Okay, so now Joseph, sees that and he wants to enter the market. And when he does enter, what will happen is we said that Bob's demand for his hot dogs will now shift downward. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we just shift the demand curve downward. And it's going to be a parallel shift. It's not like we never shift demand curve, like this, right? It's going to be parallel. So this is D1, and I'm going to do the same thing for the marginal revenue curve. The marginal revenue is going to, so demand D1, we shifted the demand curve, right, parallelly to get D1. So from D to D1, they're parallel to each other, and I'm going to do the same thing. The new marginal revenue curve is going to be parallel to the MR. Oops. Okay, Sandra? So now we have a new profit maximizing quantity as well, right? Because the MR1 intersects MC at a different point than before. So this is the new profit maximizing quantity, which is lower than before, right? So individual farms, because there are new farms that have entered the market, they're now making less than before. And the price is also less than before, right? So the price is over here. Okay, so this is P1. So what do you notice about P1?
Okay.
Is there any more profit at P1, economic profit?
Yeah.
Where? So at P1 Q1, right? This would be the total revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the total cost at Q1? So whenever price is equal to ATC, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So as you see at this Q1, right? This is the average total cost of producing Q1 quantities, right? So the price is this height, but this same height is the average total cost is that same height as well, right? Average total cost of Q1. Aren't they the same height? The P1 is this height, but then this the average total cost of producing Q1 is the same height. So what does that tell us? If P is equal to ATC and we multiply both sides by Q, we get P times Q is total revenue, and then this times ATC times Q is total cost. If total revenue and total cost are equal, we have zero economic profit. Okay? So short-run profits or losses will not be sustained in the long run. So this kind of adjustment where the demand curve shifts downward, right, and the marginal revenue shifted downward, all this happens in the long run. And in the long run, then you will have zero economic profit. Okay?
Yeah.
And we're gonna do the same thing, when we're trying to do this for, when there is loss in the short run. Oops.
Oops.
Okay, so then this is where at Q star, average total cost is way up there, price is here, so then your loss would be over here. Okay,
Yeah.
Sandra? So that would be your loss because price is lower than average total cost at Q star. Okay, so once that happens, this farm is making economic losses. Let's take a look at what will happen to their demand curve. So if they're making losses, some farms will exit, right? And for the remaining farms, some of those customers from the farms that have exited are going to come to the farms that have stayed. So the demand for their product is actually going to increase. So we show that by shifting the demand curve up. Yes. So this is going to be D1, and we're going to do the same thing for the marginal revenue curve. So this is MR2. Okay, and now we have a new point of intersection of MR2 and MC. So this is going to be the new quantity, and then this is going to be the new price, P2. Idea is the same, okay? This height is P2, right? But then that height is also the average total cost of Q2. So whenever we have this situation where P is equal to ATC, we have total revenue is equal to total cost, or zero economic profit. Okay, Sandra?
Yeah.
Zero economic profit. For monopolistic competition, it's always going to be that case that they're going to make zero economic profit in the long run. They can make loss, they can have positive economic profit in the short run. They can have negative economic profit in the short run, but in the long run, it will always be at zero or normal. Okay. And you're going to have to make sure to draw them in such a way that, it looks the part. When I shifted the demand curve, I made sure to shift it, by an amount, right? So that, I didn't shift it all the way up there. I shifted it only as much so that, the demand curve was touching the average total cost, at one point. It was only touching the average total cost. Do you see that? It's the same idea here. So you cannot draw it like all the way up here, because then you would be showing like positive economic profit or something. Okay.
Yeah.
So then the last bit we're going to talk about, so this idea of long run equilibrium. So monopolistically competitive markets are going to make normal profits in the long run. Okay, and they're gonna look like this. Okay, so where price is equal to ATC. So this is your demand curve, this is your marginal revenue, this is marginal cost. At the intersection of marginal cost and marginal revenue is where your Q star is. And then your P star, you're gonna take your Q star and then extend it all the way to meet your demand, and that is your price. But then in the long run, right, the price is gonna be at a level where it is equal to the average total cost curve. So then that gives you, if P is equal to ATC, remember, that means you have zero economic profits. In the long run, in monopolistic competition, it is always going to be this case. Okay, your average total cost curve is not going to be lower or higher than your price. It's just going to be equal. But one thing to remember is that when we looked at perfect competition, we also saw this similar case, but it was a little bit different. So this was, this is P star in perfect competition. So this is, I'm showing you perfect competition, how that was different. In perfect competition, in the long run, the price was equal to the minimum point of the average total cost curve. Here, it is not at the minimum point. Okay? The minimum point happens when it crosses the marginal cost, which was over here. But with monopolistic competition or monopoly, right? Not with monopoly. So with monopolistic competition, right? In the long run, the price will equal to average total cost, So that will give you zero economic profit. It's just that it's not going to happen at the minimum point of the average total cost curve. Okay, so that is another distinction from perfect competition. Then this the last two slides, here we're going to talk about this idea of efficiency. Okay, so we talked about this, when we talked about perfect competition. We also saw this, when we were talking about monopoly, this idea of, we saw we always make comparisons with perfect competition because, it's like the ideal type of market structure because it achieves this kind of efficiency. Allocative efficiency means that you are producing the amount, the quantity that society desires, that society wants. You're not producing any more, you're not producing any less, you are producing exactly the amount that society wants you to produce. So if you do that, then your market is allocatively efficient. So only perfect competition actually achieves, all these types of efficiencies. All the other markets don't do that. So when we talked about monopoly, we saw that, monopoly did not achieve this allocative efficiency. So monopolistic competition doesn't achieve this either. Doesn't achieve allocative efficiency. So this happens. So allocative efficiency, right? The amount that society wants you to produce, this happens when price is equal to marginal cost, right? This is also equal to, where demand is equal to your marginal cost. All these mean the same thing. And in perfect competition, all of these things are equal to each other. Demand is equal to marginal revenue, which is equal to marginal cost, which is equal to price. So all of these things are equal in perfect competition. So when we're gonna look at it, so in this graph, we are looking at it from the perspective of a monopolistic competition graph. So the demand curve is downward sloping, we have marginal revenue curve, but what I want you to imagine is where would, if this were perfect competition, how much would be produced? Okay, so if this were perfect competition, demand would be equal to marginal revenue. Okay, demand and marginal revenue are equal in perfect competition, so therefore the quantity they would produce is where this demand equals marginal cost, which happens right here, right? So this is the demand curve, and then the marginal cost is over here. So this is where, if this were a perfect competition, we would produce this quantity QC. Do you see that, Sandra? Hello? Sandra? Are you here? Hello? Can you hear me? Sandra?
Yes.
So did you hear what I just said?
Yes.
Okay, this is important, So what I was saying is that if this were a perfectly competitive market, the amount that they would produce would be where, this demand curve intersects the marginal cost, because in perfect competition, demand is equal to marginal revenue. So the idea, this formula still holds, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's where you find quantity. So that idea is still true because, demand is equal to marginal revenue. So essentially you're finding, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So if this were perfectly competitive, this is how much would be produced. and then the price they would charge would just be where, that at that same level where P is equal to MC. So PC would be for perfect competition, QC would be for perfect competition. But now that we know that we're talking about monopolistic competition, and then they have a downward sloping demand curve, right? Their marginal revenue is not the same as their demand curve. Their marginal revenue curve is this other line, right? This other graph, which is below their demand curve. Okay, so their profit maximizing quantity is over here, right, at Q star, and then the price is over here at P star. So monopolistic competition charges a higher price at P star, but they're producing a lower quantity than perfect competition. So this quantity QC, this is what we call a socially optimal quantity. So this is how much society wants to produce. Society wants monopolistic competition to produce, but they are not doing that. They're producing Q star, which is lower, and they're charging a higher price. So what that essentially does is it creates this triangle in between. So the 3 points on the triangle are, this QC, this Q star, and then this P star, right? So that forms this triangle, and this is an area, right, of surplus that is not going to either consumer, that is going to neither consumer nor producer. So this is something that is just lost, poof, vanishes in thin air. Nobody can capture this. And all of this happens because we're not producing, or the monopolistically competitive farm is not producing this quantity QC and charging this price PC, right? They produce Q star and charge P star, which then creates deadweight loss. There is no deadweight loss in perfect competition, but there will be deadweight loss with monopoly or monopolistic competition. Okay.
Okay.
So then the last sort of side that we're going to talk about is this idea of productive efficiency. So productive efficiency is different than allocative efficiency. So this has to do with the method of producing. So are you producing things at least cost?
One question.
Yeah.
Average cost is the same as average total cost.
Yes. So sometimes we talk about average total cost, sometimes we talk about average cost, but mostly you will see average total cost. Okay, because average cost, it doesn't really make sense because what cost are you talking on average of? So you're talking about the total cost, and then the average of the total cost would be average total cost. So sometimes if we're talking colloquially, we talk about average cost, but most of the time you'll see average total cost.
Okay.
Okay. So here, once again, the idea of productive efficiency is the method of producing, and are you producing using the least cost method? Least cost method. So here, that has to do with producing a quantity, where average total cost is at minimum. So remember when I was showing you the graph with the long run equilibrium, that monopolistically competitive industries, they don't produce at the minimum of average total cost. They produce, somewhere where their average total cost is still higher. Do you see that, Sandra?
Yeah.
So this is how much the price that is going to be charged by the monopolistic competition, and this is how much they're producing. So this Q star, right, uh, um, is over here, and then the QE, right, this is the quantity where average total cost is going to be at its minimum. Okay, but they don't produce this quantity. they have the capacity to do this, okay, they can actually produce at this quantity QE, which would minimize their average total cost, but they don't do that. They intentionally produce at this quantity Q star and charge this price P star, where their average total cost, is a little bit higher. And the reason they do that, is because, if they were to produce this quantity QE, uh, the price would be like lower, right? The price would be a little bit lower. So by restricting their quantity, by producing a little bit more, they can charge a higher price. So they intentionally choose not to produce a higher quantity, even though they have the capacity to do it. So, but they choose not to produce at the minimum of the average total cost curve. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the end of monopolistic competition for us. Do you have any questions?
No.
No. Okay. Make
So
sure.
now
Mhm.
what we are doing?
Sorry.
Like when in the next class, what?
We have.
What?
We're gonna talk about oligopoly, which is the last market structure that we're gonna talk about. Then we have three other different lectures, and then we're done
Oh,
with micro.
oh, okay.
All right. Make sure to do the homework and also, ask any questions that you didn't understand or get to, in lecture in your recitation class. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
One
Yeah.
question. I don't know why, but when I have your classes, like in my calendar, all my classes are marked as missed in red.
That's weird. So you did miss a couple classes, in the past, like 3 or 4 classes. So that could have been it. But
No, I know, but not like every class. It's in red.
oh,
Every.
that's weird. I will
Yeah.
check and see if it is
Yeah.
the same on my end. Okay.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. No problem, Sandra. I'll see you.
Bye.
Bye bye.